NIN 山地です。今日一日よろしくお願いします。招待講演なんですが、もちろん、in English ですので、maybe my mission here is to activate your English brain before, waiting his talk. And Guido Aben is a kind of superstar around the NLAN community, of course. And the NLAN is the organization like NII. So each country has an NLAN, and he knows everything. He's be everywhere around the NLAN community. So that's why he knows deep inside, of course, into the European research data infrastructure, the EOSC. So we can't wait your presentation. So please join me and introduce, invite him to the chamber here.
Thank you. Do you have a slide clicker? How do I move my slides? I'll start by saying that that's what they call praising somebody into hell. I'm not actually a superstar, and I don't know everything. This is going to be a personal journey through what I've seen from EOSC. I've been in Japan. This is my first time in Japan. I've been here for a week now, and the first couple of days it struck me how unbelievably hard it is to grok anything from Japanese. A completely different character set. The sounds are entirely different. And then yesterday it hit me that the inverse must be true too. It must be really hard for you to learn English. And so here is this stupid situation where there's 500 people having to speak the API of one guy. It should have been the other way around, but I don't speak any Japanese, so I thank you very much for having the patience to listen to me blabber in English. I'm trying to be as slow as I can, yeah. The problem is, this is a topic I'm really enthusiastic about, so I have a tendency to go a little bit quicker, but I can't do that. And I've also overloaded the slide pack, so there are easily over 40 slides in here, which usually I would ram through at a pace of 1 slide per minute, but I can't. So the slides are very verbose, there's a lot of letters and words, so anybody who downloads them later will see what I was trying to argue for. EOSC is the European Open Science Cloud, a data science initiative in Europe that looks a lot like what you're talking about here in Japan, that has a lot of similarities around what you're doing with your Gakunin RDM system, with your, what's your repository cloud called again? Now, EOSC has been going on in Europe for more than 10 years. And anybody who's been tracking it might think that after 10 years we would have the rocket ready to go to the moon. We don't. And there's a few lessons to be learned. And I'm going to try and be open about it, but not unnecessarily critical. These have all been clever people. Nobody tried to mess this up on purpose. It's just that it turns out to be really hard to build a collaborative open system across more than 20 nations in a cohesive fashion. Right clicker goes right? No, it's the big button, of course. I'm so good with technology. So, they're all personal observations. This is me saying what I've seen. This is not anybody's party line. This is not a coordinated stance either from the European Commission or from SUNET or from anybody else that I've ever worked for. I'm sure other people might have a different opinion, and I'm happy to hear that. This is just the only way that I can explain what has happened over the past 10 years. And I get enthusiastic, and my vision is clouded sometimes too, so I'm disclaiming everything I say, if you want to take a shot of that. Yeah. I could do this live too, but I guess not indoors. So, a short history of EOSC. Why has it been such a tumultuous journey? And what can you learn from us? Where did it start? Roughly around 2015. If you can see, right around about 2015 is where the cusp, is where the exponential starts of the speed of hyperscalers moving into the game. Around that time, university IT managers began to notice that grey IT was a thing, that they were trying to deliver cloud services to their researchers, but the researchers were not always using them anymore. They were just swiping their credit card and going to Amazon. Not in larger droves yet, but it was beginning to happen. So the EC and different nation states were concerned about this. It also signaled the fact that from that year onwards, it was clear that there was another way of delivering IT infrastructure in a cloudish fashion, using hypervisors, using virtualization. So from that point on, people were less tolerant to see funding for IT being used in a less than efficient way, the usual disk under desk phenomenon that some power professors use. So from that point on, people began to talk to each other, like, what should we do about this? The initial ideas were, maybe we should build a hyperscaler cloud ourselves as well. That was the initial idea. Within months, or at least a year, or at most a year, it began to be very clear that that would be really risky. Lawsuits, there were a few lobbyists from very big hyperscalers who made their way to Brussels and explained in no uncertain terms that that was a bad idea. And so in very academic fashion, we retreated into abstractions, up into the cloud, talking about, well, what do we actually want to do? So there are things that are really hard to do, but what do we want to do? We want to do beautiful things. We want to do fair. We want to do metadata, etc. So before you know it, that became the dominant narrative, and people forgot, more or less, or conveniently forgot what the real reason was that they actually initially started to talk about this. As an interlude, what is a cloud really? It's just a word, right? Some people cynically say it's somebody else's computer. It's nothing new, it's just you've given the problem away to somebody else. That's actually mentally what a lot of stakeholders think of when they say it's a cloud. Particularly researchers do this. They go, it's all the stuff that I don't want to do. Right? It's all the stuff that I'm hotly hoping somebody else will do. Don't care who it is, just I'll describe what it is and then I won't deal with this any longer. Nobody actually then considers that to be worthy in the sense of money, in the sense of effort. It's been done by somebody else. By the time I need it, I'll swipe my credit card. That's a scary metaphor. Things go wrong from the point that people are permitted to have that point of view. How's my speed going? If anybody goes lower, faster, medium, medium. Right. By way of comparison, big industry, let's take the airline industry. They don't build flights. That's what they market. They show you the destination. They show you the in-flight menu. They don't show you the engines. They don't show you the fuel that goes into, but that's what they do. That's how they compete. They're competitive because they have a fleet. In Europe, talking about EOSC for the first 5 years, we were completely allergic to talking about the fleet. I've had conversations with high-ranking EC officers who, in around 2017, when I said, why aren't we building the underlying infrastructure, literally to my face said, but Guido, storage is a solved problem. It takes really hotly wanting to believe that the problem has gone away to say something like storage is a solved problem. That's like saying flights are a solved problem. Well, it's going to cost you if that's what you think. Anybody ever seen a Maslow pyramid? The hierarchy of needs, where it begins with everybody basically needs shelter and food, but that's not what you want to talk about. You want to talk about belonging and beautiful music. So again, we like to talk about the beautiful things. We like to write a paper about things. But that's not typically in your research process where most of your PhDs are. Most of your PhDs struggle with storage, struggle with finding enough compute to do their research on. So it's a tendency thing again. And look at the size of the problem. Under the bottom end of the pyramid is much larger than the top of the pyramid. But the bottom end is not something that we want to talk about, not something that's easy to fund. Similarly, if you look at the adoption curve, has anybody ever seen an adoption curve? The concept of leaders and followers and most people being roughly in the middle. Most people use technology that's been around for a while. Right? So that's where the numbers are. If you're trying to build a cloud, if you're trying to build an infrastructure, you need numbers. You need lots of users on your infrastructure. That's when you get efficiencies. If there's only 10 or 100 people using your service, it's not actually a cloud, it's still a special. It's an application, not a cloud. And we keep forgetting this, or we keep conveniently forgetting that we need user numbers. All right, moving on. So in that period still, while we were allergic to looking at what actually needed to be built, how did we go about actually doing something? Well, the tendency was to use grants labeled EOSC to fund things in research ecosystems that had already been ongoing. It's just that from that point onward, we just called them EOSC. So all of the very many disciplines, at least 30 different disciplines from high energy physics, astronomy, material science, bioinformatics, all the way to computational linguistics, they all had their own infrastructures, some good, some less ripe, but they all kept on being funded under the guise of we're working towards a cloud. But there was no architecture. So here, this is a scheme that has been granted recently, in fact, 2024. So if you don't define an architecture, this goes on for very long. And this is beautiful work. These people are doing good work. I'm not saying that this is bad. It's just that these are 5 different science disciplines, from life sciences to environmental sciences to high energy physics to material science to social sciences, 5 different, and they're all pitching what they want to do in the context of a cloud. And if you count, those are 27 different types of user-facing applications or training, or 27 is a lot. The only cloud that I know of who run more than 40 services is Amazon AWS. They run 240 and they're famous for it. Famous, nobody knows how they do it. A typical cloud, I know that the biggest European cloud is a French one. What they call again, OVH. They run 40. Does anybody know how many services Sakura Cloud runs? I don't, but it's not going to be a very high number. And here is 5 research disciplines pitching to run up 27 different types of services without any underpinning architecture. And I'm not blaming them. I know that this is what they need to do. It's just that the mental conception that we have is that this is going to become a cloud and somehow is going to be used by very, very many people. When there is no career paths in these universities, there are no DevOps engineers here, there is none of these institutes. A typical university doesn't have funds to run large-scale data centers for a very long time, including the lift and shift that's required to do this. So these are actually conceptually applications, not a cloud. If all you have is a hammer, everything else becomes a nail. So what did we do in all of that time? If you are the European Commission, what are you good at? Governance. So we spent a lot of time developing really complex governance around EOSC. We had a lot of committees and stakeholders and processes and fora. For 5 years going, we spent a lot of time, and it's really complex and it works really well. It just manages nothing. The same for roadmap documents. It's really complex, it's well written, there's good thought going into it. These are all people with IQs well over 120. They're doing good work. It's just that there is no architecture. Nobody has defined what we're actually doing. They're just still going, it's a research cloud. So this is a real risk, right? Tactically convenient. If you don't actually talk about what you want to do, then it can't go wrong. It's very convenient. They call this the emperor's new clothes, if you've ever heard the... But what we ended up with was an enormous amount of interesting ideas for services and a white paper for it, but nobody to run it up. And then we funded the next round. And the only people winning, of course, were the people who developed grey IT, Amazon, Google, etc., because the drift of data into these services, while we continued to disappoint researchers, just went on. Year after year. You saw the initial graph of the hyperscalers exponentially going up. Well, then the second chapter. So for 5 years this went on. Slight disgruntlement, slight unhappiness at the EC began to happen. We, the operators, the NIIs of this world, the SUNETs, the RNETs, the SERVs, we were baffled. We had systems like this running, typically on a country-by-country basis. We had been building these sorts of systems and helping research disciplines build their infrastructures. So if the EC wanted to build a cloud and they wanted to start with large user numbers, we actually had these sorts of services. like Gakun and RDM-like services, built on typically Nextcloud, OwnCloud, with a Jupyter Notebooks on top. Simple stuff, but hundreds of thousands of users. The EC wouldn't talk to us. We, meanwhile, ran annual fora and workshops, etc., where we came together. This is the most interesting one as far as I'm concerned, the CS3, which is the Cloud Synchronization and Sharing Systems, CSSS, CS3. We're all nerds. Where the NREN operators of Gakun and RDM-like systems and Nextclouds and OwnClouds come together to discuss how to grow these systems, how to please their users, and how to link them all together. At one point in 2029, when we were getting really frustrated about not getting any traction, we tallied up the numbers. We counted how many users and what sort of storage we had collectively inside of Europe. Those numbers were pretty good. Much better than anything that EOSC had been managing to reach at that time. So we began a conversation with the EC, and then around about the same time, the EC themselves began to be receptive to talk about infrastructure, not just clouds. They too had realized that all of the money they had spent so far didn't really end up turning into services. And they were beginning to use the word cloud less and replacing it with federations of nodes, nodes being already existing installations in countries. So that was useful language for us. In fact, in a slide from around that time, this is a slide I've stolen from the EC, in a slide from around that time, in the red, you can see that all of a sudden they're now talking about federations of existing research infrastructure. It's a really important political flip after 5 years, right? It took 5 years to get to this point, and they still didn't have an architecture. But they did have a funding round coming up, and they called it Infra-EOSC 2019. And we got a few phone calls saying, if you pitch your ideas with these Nextcloud, OwnCloud-based systems to the next round, you stand a chance. So we pitched CS3 from that name of the conference, MESH, because that's what we're trying to build for EOSC. Definitely the worst project acronym we ever came up with. But remember this one, because it's going to come back. The whole idea was link all of these Nextclouds and OwnClouds plus all of these Jupyters, link them all together using existing protocols so that the data in all of those different country-based entities becomes available to everybody, including the computes and the recipes. I'm in here somewhere, yeah, over there, still looking young. It was a 3-year project, started in 2020, so mental note, by 2023, which will be in the next couple of slides, this tapers off and we should have results. And the idea was to link sites using a protocol that already existed called OCM, Open Cloud Mesh, which, fast forward, is now being standardized inside of the IETF, so we're making progress. And the 4 use cases that we were trying to highlight for the EC were, and I think this will interest you, first one is really simple, shared data sets between users on different sites. So if an installation exists in, say, the Netherlands and another installation exists in Sweden, data from both of those is available to each of the users and they can themselves initiate the shares. Second one is a little more interesting already. If you have a document viewing or editing platform on top of these entities, Collabora does this, OpenOffice does this, there's a few packages that can do this. You can also enable collaborative editing across different nodes. So you end up with something like Google Docs, not quite as user-friendly, but something like Google Docs across the different sites. Third one is more interesting already. If both sites have a Jupyter Notebooks and you share the recipes through a binder hub and you share the mount directories between the nodes, you end up with a collaborative computational environment as well. And the fourth one is, once you've shared data and different users can see each other's data and you initiate a transfer, the systems can of course detect that this transfer is happening and hand it off to faster tools. So a means of detecting what users are actually doing on the systems and then bypassing it through better piping and methods. I understand NII does a lot of research on faster data transfer methods. This would interest you. We did so using as much reuse as we could because of the same paradigm of we need lots of users, lots of eyeballs with the minimum cost available to build an actual cloud rather than an application. And then in 2022, just a year before our project wound down, we began to hear sounds that the EC wanted the next round not to be a grant, but a tender, a procurement. I can't stress enough how weird that is for the research environment. Has anybody of you ever pitched to a grant? I'm guessing yes. Has anybody of you ever pitched to a tender? I'm guessing no. Because all of a sudden your legal department and your finance department have an opinion. It's weird stuff. But the EC were signaling very clearly they were going to section off 50 million euros. Up until that time, the EC had spent 500 million euros on EOSC. Don't be shocked. I tried to convert it to yen over there, and I hope I did a right job. But so only 10% of the money ever spent on EOSC so far was going to be sectioned into that tender to actually procure for services. And the tender spec they issued looked a lot like what we'd been building in CS3 Mesh for EOSC, which was great news for us. It meant that they had seen what we were doing. So from the dozens and dozens of grant schemes that they had ever allowed to blossom, only us and another project were taken up as interesting for the grants, for the tender scheme. This is what they came up with. I'll leave it up here, I won't talk through the whole thing, but it's essentially, lot one is something I have no expertise on. That was won by the people who built EOSC Future. That's about linking help desks and ticketing systems. It's also about linking knowledge graphs over the data, so it's very low in the stack and extremely high in the stack with nothing in between. Lot two is essentially the compute infrastructure, VMs, containers, Kubernetes. Lot three is researcher-facing services, an own cloud or a next cloud. They call these EFSS systems, Enterprise File Sync and Share, a file sender, which you already run, and the Jupyter notebooks. Very, very close to what we'd already been building. So we pitched to this tender, and yay, we won it. SUNET and a large consortium of other NRENs won this tender. Enormous relief by around 2023. This is nice language to say what the EC actually did. So this is the nice way to say why they tendered. The real reason is they were sick and tired of not getting any services through the grants. And they wanted to hold an operator to the task. They wanted to be able to say, we gave you the money, now deliver the service or else. That's why they tendered. So lot two, a lot of details around how that is composed. I won't talk you through the whole thing. It's actually really vanilla. The great thing is that the EC is now committing to an infrastructure that is explainable. There's nothing weird about this. It's vanilla, OKD, OpenStack. Everybody runs this stuff. This is what they should have chosen. No special things, and they did. That's the great news. And the lot three is basically what I explained, what CS3 Mesh for EOSC is. So it's an own cloud, Jupyter notebooks, a collaborative document system, and a way to move files between the sites, researcher-facing, with the extra requirement that what we delivered needed to be federatable. So other nodes built to the same architecture should be interlinkable. They literally said so in the specs. So anything we delivered should have APIs so that it can talk to another node based of the same components. That was a clever move by the EC. We, the people who actually deliver Lot 3, focus on OCM, Open Cloud Mesh, the protocol that underpins those 4 use cases that I showed earlier, to do that work. The requirement was pretty open. You have to make sure that you can federate. This is what we're banking on. OCM is the way to do it. And as I said, it's being standardized by the IETF at the moment, so I think it's bona fide. I don't think this is now a risky choice anymore. The tender also says that we need to use money that's been given to us to do this federation work horizontally to other nodes as they begin to appear. Later slides will show you how this federation process works. Also vertically, up into science cases, because as I just showed you, this procurement only goes up to data and compute researcher-facing services, not the actual workflow stuff that sits on top. But we have to use some of the money, we have to make it available if a science case wants to integrate with us. Again, a slide from the EC. So that's, the previous slides were what we as the tenderers, we as the service providers see. This is how the EC sees it, and it's very similar language. So the value proposition isn't that the first node that they've built, that's the one that we've just delivered, that's not going to be delivering all of the services for everybody. It's more like a hub in a hub and spoke federation. It's put there to start the not administrative, what am I trying to say? Architectural. It's there to start the architectural process so that all of the other nodes that begin to be built know what specs they have to abide by. I'll leave it up there so you can see it later. And again, conceptually, the red dotted line is the scope of the EOSC EU node. It's not everything. It's not all of the horizontal services. It's not all of the vertical services. It's a minimum viable product. It's enough that you can start a cloud with, but it tries not to be too prescriptive so that nations, individual countries can still decide how to build it out. But the minimum, according to the EC, is the bit in red. This, by the way, is the first architectural diagram you've seen. 2023, 7 years after the start of EOSC, we finally see architectural diagrams, and it makes me as an engineer very happy. The future then, where is this going to go? We have this central node, we have enormous governance processes. Where is this going to go? Okay, so from this year onward, the federation process begins, administered in a very complex way, but calls have been put out, invitations have been put out for the individual countries to develop their own nodes and federate them. Initially with the central node. I can't call it a central node for political reasons, but it is a central node, but we call it a pilot node. Initially with the pilot node and then with each other to form a full mesh. That process starts now, 2025. So if people tracking this process in Japan think that you've been late to the party, you haven't, it starts now. You haven't missed anything. In fact, you've probably missed the right bits. It's all complex, it's underdefined. So we have an architecture for what the node is, we still don't have an architecture for what the federation process is. We, the operators, may be relying on OCM as the interlinking process. The EC haven't said that that's literally what they expect. So it's still going to be vague. Because we do complex governance, the committees around EOSC have set up all of these working groups. These are all individual working groups to oversee the federative process. Again, I'm not going to read them all out, but there are working groups to define how VREs are going to be federated, how software distribution is going to be handled, how, fortunately, those sync and share systems are going to be connected to each other. But there's a lot of these working groups, and again, fruitful talk, but not very much coordination going on between them. So I'm still scared. And again, according to the EC, the EU node is going to remain central in this process. So the federating capabilities on the left, keeping some digital services to a small number of users so that at least we have some eyeballs on the process while we onboard sites. So the pilot EU node does have some users on it. It's just not meant to provide service for all of Europe. Again, very contentious. Not everybody agrees with this. And the EC themselves want to put resources on the node as well. A very important service that the EC wants to put on is their own authentication process, so that we can authenticate users not just from academia, but also from industry, who might want to log in through the EC process. Whether that works, we don't know, but at least politically we have an answer. And the future is in fact the federative process, as you can tell, planned from 2027 onwards. So again, the future is still, it's ahead and it's still a long time. So the epilogue. If your landscape is this complex, now Japan is slightly less complex with only 110 million inhabitants. All of Europe is about 600 million. But at about a sixth of the size, you're about as complex. You've got many prefectures, you've got many consortia, people wanting to talk to each other but not necessarily agreeing on everything. If the landscape is this complex, take the hard decisions up front. Stare them down. Make sure that nobody leaves the room until everybody's gone, I think we actually really agree, rather than, yeah, kind of, sort of, let's go home. And that's a risky process. The second one is kill your darlings. And that's really hard because everybody wants to talk about the beautiful thing. Everybody wants to talk about the destination of the flight. Nobody wants to talk about carbon neutral emissions. But please, only start talking about the destination of the flight when you have a fleet. Retreating into abstractions is, again, a risky process. So be prepared to look at the things that you can't do even if you want to do them. The third one is that it's the re-emergence, it's the coming back to the scene of operators. So, like NII. For a while, we were forgotten, we're back on stage. I know I must sound a little vengeful and wrathful, but it's just, don't forget about the importance of owning assets and operating them. The fourth one is a happy news. You're here at the right time. You didn't miss anything. If anybody of you slept through the whole thing, well done. Because you've outsourced the making of mistakes to the Europeans. Excellent. And the fifth one is, and that's a personal message for me, all of this time, I'm not a superstar, but I'm sort of an expert in this game. And there were times when I thought, I have no idea what the hell is happening. What is going on? And 10 years later, it turns out that most of my hunches were actually right. They weren't going to produce anything. And that much governance is not a good idea. So trust your instincts. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And that's it. Any questions?
It's a communication time, so maybe Kenjiro has.
Yeah, thank you for the very vivid talk. So thank you. I appreciate that you so vividly share the initial struggle. It may not be the right word, the initial challenges you face, and come up with the idea of the key value, so file sharing and interoperability. So when it comes to interoperability, so the idea I got is, so you sort of envision the actual hardware will be coming over time in many places, not just a single big supercomputer type purchase. So that's the interoperability ensures that the entire EOSC will sort of autonomously grow over time across many institutions. So if that is approximately the right idea, understanding about your idea, so one of the things I imagine will be challenging is because things and technologies are moving so fast, so being interoperable to some specification that was written many years ago is sort of obsolete, and nobody wants to follow that particular specification. So how you incentivize future purchases to follow this interoperability?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The reason why Europe always chooses a federative approach rather than a central one is political. Has nothing to do with technology. Every lawmaker, every politician wants the funding they give to the EC to come back to their country. So they can say, we're going to build an EOSC, I just want the thing that I'm going to build to be in my own country. And so by nature of politics, you end up with a federated system, not because anybody has gone, it would be technically really good to do it like this, because technically it isn't really good to do it like this. It's just, it's the only way to do it. The prime example of how this operates is CERN with the WLCG, where all of the high performance computing done for the LHC experiment is in all of the different member states that contribute to CERN. It would have been much more logical to put the supercomputer in Geneva, but no. So yes, you're exactly right. Do you know what Metcalfe's law is? The law that the value of a network increases by almost the square of the number of participants. So the reason why a country should want to keep their local EOSC node in the larger cloud of data is because by doing that, by continuing to be involved, the value of the national node increases. So there is a reason why people should want to continue this governance process, but it's tentative and a little weak. And so those governance processes should continue to track where standards are going, should continue to keep everybody harmonized, because there is an incentive. But you're absolutely right to point it out. It's a weak spot, and there's going to be a lot of continuous team building and a lot of continuous looking at common ground required. Yes, it's absolutely a weak spot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So a related question I want to ask if I may. So what do you exactly mean by the being interoperable? So what qualifies as sort of procurement for following the specification? And the other thing is, so is there any specific budget incentive, like, so if you follow this specification, the part of the purchase budget comes from, I don't know, whatever, so Central EU or something like that?
You are really good at pinpointing the pain points. Can somebody get him out of the room? So how does that work? Well, this is the best we have at the moment. I'll give you a really still joke. Infinity for the EU is the next 3 years. After that, that's just event horizon. So if something is funded for the next 3 years, we pretend that it's forever funding. So we're happy enough that inside of the current EC budgets for EOSC, these sorts of federative processes have been written in for 2027 and later. You saw the slide. Nobody commits to anything beyond that. It would be great if they did, but they don't. Mm-hmm. So there is money available in 3 different tranches, again, because we have trouble picking one winner. So there are 3 different ways, if you are a node, to get funded to continue this work. Inside of this group, there is some incentive funding that you can apply to, and then your node gets money to do a federation. There is also, it's just closed, a big call for funding to stimulate consortia of nodes to come together and between themselves define what to do, how to do a federation. Different efforts. That call just closed. The decision should be in by about Q1 2026. We're in one of those consortia, but there are different consortia. So you'll end up with different ways of doing this, which will then later need to be harmonized. It's just unbelievably frustrating. But so there is, that funding is available too. And then there is funding through the EOSC A, which is another administrative governance board that also oversees this federation process. 3 different ways of doing it. Money is available, but coordination is still wishy-washy.
Any other folks want to join to this discussion? Okay, Mikiko.
Thank you for the positive presentation today.
I tried.
So throughout the chaos in Europe, through EOSC, now you're showing us the bright future through your efforts. I'd like to understand, how do scientists in Europe behave by using this interoperable, wonderful world to give open data or to fetch other people's data to use in own research with a proper behavior, such as citations, such as references, which will be still very important to justify the science community?
Oh, yeah, immensely so.
So what's your vision?
No, the vision is, it's not even my vision, it's the EC's vision. that what we've built so far for EOSC is an underpinning platform, just the red bits, that they will leave it to the individual countries to do the integrations upwards into the actual science cases. So that might be material science, this might be bioinformatics. Precisely how that's going to be done is still a matter for the individual countries or the individual science cases. It's just that we're trying to harmonize how the underpinning layers work, so to get some form of efficiency. But what's going to happen in those upper layers, that's a matter for the future. I wish there was more architectural control, but there isn't. Of course, a lot of countries will argue, in Europe will argue, that that differs based on the country's law. Particularly sensitive data is a matter that's typically countries prefer to handle on a country-by-country basis. Ethics is typically handled on a country-by-country basis. And so a lot of people in those countries argue that therefore those vertical integrations need to be done in the countries. I understand why that is. It also slightly frustrates me because there's an inefficiency there, but I guess you cannot get all the way up into the scientific process and still pretend that it is a cloud system shared by very many. In the end, you end up with a science discipline of 15 people. It's just the way it is. So the answer there is that it's been pushed into it's been delegated down to the country level or the science discipline level. There is funding available, again, to do some of these integrations, but that needs to be kicked off. That's 2026 and onwards. I hope that's an answer.
Yes, you may try to convince me.
That doesn't sound good.
Because I don't see how scientists accommodate your concept that you navigate science community by bridging EOSC nodes. And it sounds good and sounds positive, but still, somebody's intellectual finding, scientific finding should be cited, should be referred, should be appreciated.
Yeah.
Even any countries in EU group.
Yeah.
So how do you share that essential concept in this EU community? That's something I don't see yet.
True, and I don't think that will be tackled at the cloud level.
Right. I'd
be surprised. What we're looking for here are efficiencies in the provisioning of large-scale IT. And we're trying to get up as far as we can to a level where the services you provide are still shared by very many people or usable by very many people. Precisely how to deal with citations, I don't think that's going to be tackled here. I don't think that's the intent or the vision.
Right.
I do think that individual science cases in their virtual research environments already look after this right now as it stands, and ought to be able to. I think they'll be able to continue to run the essential parts of their virtual research environment on top of these sorts of underpinning platforms. In a comply or explain sort of scenario, if they're able to shift their workloads onto these platforms, then I think they ought to be incentivized to do so. If they can't and they want to continue their complete vertical integration, I don't expect CERN, for instance, to ever move to this model. I don't expect most of the astronomers with their huge data levels to ever move to this model. This is more of a model for those research disciplines who don't have a credible alternative, who don't have a robust stack in place that operates well. So I think this is going to be adopted, much like with that adoption graph. I think you're going to see the first adoption here in disciplines that do not have a strong digital tradition. Like this is good for the humanities, I think, to begin with.
I imagine that soon you need to get ready for AI to be harvested, all that data transferring, sharing, not between human, but between other countries' AI properties.
Yes.
So that I think we would like to have another discussion perhaps next year.
Absolutely. Look, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but to be ready for AI means that you need to be able to present all of your relevant data across different countries in a single discipline in one lake. If you expect the the AI harvesting machinery to visit all of the individual data holdings, then I think you're in for a rough ride. I don't think that's going to happen. If you are able to present it all as one big data lake through some sort of data sharing or data amalgamation mechanism, and you retain the governance over that lake, then you've got a winner. And I think we've got a proposal here to do it, and I think not doing this leaves us without a way to present all of that European data in one lake. But we're definitely not home yet. Definitely, but it's better than nothing. Very often, what you do is the better than nothing approach, which is, yeah, not super motivating, but yeah, as soon as somebody sells you like heaven on a grant scheme, they're lying, right? It's always going to be better than nothing.
I agree. Thank you.
The last chance to communicate. No one? Oh.
Oh no!
So let me ask a novice question. So what is the relationship between EOSC and EuroHPC? And the other thing said a big AI-related funding, AI factories happening in EU. So my gut sense is the huge hardware budget will be poured into EuroHPC and AI factories. And do you envision that one of those was a few of these nodes are becoming a part of EOSC interoperable with each other? And somewhat specific question is, I assume that this EOSC specification assumes they are virtualized environment, so you can somehow move from one place to another. I may be wrong, but so if that happens, does it mean those EuroHPC machines become a virtualized environment?
So obviously, nobody's going to say absolutely not to that, right? For political reasons, of course it needs to be integrated at some point in time. So everybody's saying that, yes, those two initiatives should be linked. There is no practical plan to do so at the moment. There is the intent to do so. There are mechanisms in place to try and do so. But the two domains, HPC and cloud, have historically been very different. HPC deals with small numbers of really powerful users who are extremely well trained and would sell their firstborn child to get rights to the HPC. The cloud is completely different, where if we don't please the users, they go away to another system. Completely different modes of execution. So one needs to be very user-friendly, the cloud typically. Another one can afford to basically say, well, you have to log in through SSH and then it's up to you. But of course, for political reasons, both of them get tons of funding, so we can't leave the two of them as islands. So yes, I know the EC wants the two of them to be tied together. There are mechanisms in place, but right now, EOSC itself has enough challenge to make EOSC happen. And the HPC people, the Euro HPC people, are very happy to be left alone, because they know what they're doing. And how to run HPC is traditionally something that the research and education community knows how to do.
Right.
They know what they're doing. Just give us more money, then we'll do more of this. Right. Whereas building a cloud, this is the first time we've done it, and look at us tripping over our shoelaces all the time. So yes, if in 100 years' time, it's definitely going to be glued together. 10 years' time, probably. 5 years, nah. 3 years, definitely not. So something is happening, but we'll need the next 3 years to do EOSC itself. And in that time, I think Euro HPC will say, yes, we're very interested, but just leave us alone for the moment.
Okay. So considering user base, do you think the hardware budget-wise, is EOSC funded enough, or is it underfunded?
So the look that the view that EOSC takes right now is that the countries individually should build out their own hardware stacks. So the NIIs and the SUNETs and of Europe should build the nodes, mostly using national funding, and the interlinking will be funded over the top through EC monies. So it's changed. Like I said, in the first 5 years, the initial idea was use central funding to build something central, and that turned out to be just completely pie in the sky. And it's shifted around to now using member state money to build member state capabilities. And the role of EOSC is to bring it all together and provide economies of scale through that mechanism. completely different mindset. But it's very recent. So if you ask for, so I can understand that you're asking the question hoping to get a definitive answer. There are no definitive answers. We're all defining this as we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, but also very frustrating.
We are much better, I guess. So because this is a Far East country, so this is why
super efficient, no disagreements. Yeah. Perfect.
No, that's why you gave us a reality, the real reality about us. So
reality.
Yeah. Your reality, but this is a reality. Yeah, and we know. But the good news is maybe from the next fiscal year, but we are eligible to apply to the Horizon.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Build a node.
So maybe, of course, including, building up interoperability between, different service and between a European country and Japan, we could do something under that scenario. So that's going to be fun.
That would be really interesting. The OCM stuff is viable. That works.
Okay, so let's talk more. And Kenjiro and Mikiko. And thank you so much, Guido. So please join to the round of applause again. Thank you.